As part of our syllabus, today we are going to discuss about one topic is about decolonization and its effects actually. In last class, we are already discussed about these things about League of Nations and its organs and role of League of Nations in keeping international peace and security. And also we have been discussed about the failures, even political and uh, conflict resolution matters. We are already discussed about this League of Nations concept. So today we are going to discuss about uh, the emergence of third world because of decolonization after end of the World War II, many of nations they withdrawn their colonies entire the world, uh, such as British, Japan, Soviet, and French, and many others also. They they have given independence to their colonies. So many of countries like India and others, they continuously fought against this colonial rule. And with the effect of World War II, many of uh, developing nations like India got independence with the effect of World War II. And also, the independence movement of every nation lead to the emergence of series of countries that did not belong to the Western Bloc or Soviet Bloc. Western Bloc means United States of America, and Soviet Bloc means Russia. So these countries had various in features in common, including underdevelopment and rapid demographic growth, and they become known collectively as the third world. So this third world, an expression coined by French economist and demographer Alfred Savi in 1952. Who is that economist? French economist and demographer Alfred Savi. So, in the 1950s, five newly independent Asian countries like India, Pakistan, Ceylon, Ceylon means Sri Lanka, Burma means Myanmar, and Indonesia took the initiative to rally the third world countries to form a united front against colonization. So, on 17th April of 1955, the first Afro-Asian conference was held in Bandung in a bid by third world countries to consolidate their position on the international stage. So, in in the time of 1956, Suez crisis illustrated these new international power relationships in Egypt. On 25th July of 1956, President Nasser, a champion of Pan-Arabism, and announced the nationalization of the Suez Canal Company. So the Suez crisis directly threatened the interests of France, the United Kingdom, and Israel, leading to a trial of strength that culminated in a joint military operation by the three countries against the former British um, protectorate in October 1956. So, the dogged efforts by France and Britain to safeguard their economic and financial interests at the expense of a developing country prompted the involvement of the international community. So many situations and incidents has made this type of uh, decolonization process after the uh, end of the World War II. So, and also many countries fought against their uh, colonial rulers for their political independence. Like many uh, colonial rulers, most of the colonial rulers are from the European countries. So they established their colonies in most of the places in the Asia and Africa. So that is also one of the fact about these colonization. So after the World War II, many nations fought against their colonial rulers for the so so those who are got independence after the World War II called as Third World. So as we said in 1952, Alfred Savi, a French demographer, wrote an article uh, comparing with the Third World with the Third Estate. So that's what the term Third World was first introduced or coined by this Alfred Savi. So he wrote an article entitled Three Worlds, One Planet. So he argued for the fact that the presence of the third world is in fact overlooked due to the overemphasis on the confrontation of the two superpowers, which in fact should have been credited with the first world title going by the historical facts. So first world means developed capitalist industrial countries, a block of countries aligned with the United States after the World War II, North America, Western Europe, Japan, and Australia. So, Second World refers to the former communist socialist industrial states, the Eastern Bloc, the territory, and the sphere of influence of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, so USSR. Today, Russia, Eastern Europe, and some of the Turk states like Kazakhstan as well as China. So this is Second World. Third World means, as we said, after Second World War, uh, refers to underdeveloped and for better developing countries like India. So many of the nations, these third world countries are less developed or least developed regions, including, according to United Nations organization, the more developed nations which comprise North America, Japan, Europe, and Australia and New Zealand. Less developed regions comprise almost all regions of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Asia, and the Pacific islands of Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. Least developed countries, for examples, are Afghanistan, Chad, Ethiopia, Uzbekistan, Yemen, and Zambia. So, the process of decolonization and the nation building had broad uh, patterns, like one is civil war, and second one is negotiated independence, and third one is incomplete decolonization. So, these three phases are part of this decolonization. So, including the United Nations, um, they directed United States and Soviet Union encouraged the colonies to make a bid for independence. So, decolonization unfolded in two phases. One is first from 1945 to 1955, mainly affecting countries in the Near and Middle East and Southeast Asia. So, while the capitalist and communist blocs embarked on a Cold War in the third world as the conflicts got very hot in Asia and Africa. Anti-colonial leaders capitalized on European weakness and Japanese defeat to intensify their campaigns for independence. So, in this first phase, we are also part of this decolonization because we got independence in 1947, right? So the second phase started in 1955. The mainly concerned North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. So whether their transition to independence had been peaceful or violent. Europe's former territories faced formidable difficulties. These may be because both the Soviet Union and the United States saw them as pawns in the Cold War struggle. So the major battlegrounds between the communist and capitalist ideologies were the former French colony of Vietnam and Portugal's major African possessions. So, subsequent spread of independence had gone to in Asia and Africa during entire the period of 1945 to 1960. So, the colonized peoples of Southeast Asia were the first for demand for their independence. So, as like India. So in China, civil war broke between nationalists and communists in 1946 and continued until 1949. So on 1st October of 1949, China emerged as the world's most populous communist state, the People's of Republic of China. So Mao's victory coming so soon after the British evacuation of India added to the feeling of the colonies everywhere that imperialism could be beaten. So events followed a similar pattern in nearby French colonies, and France had to cope with demands for independence from its colonies. So in 1960, some 15 new independent states emerged. So in 1946 also, France launched armed campaign against nationalists under Ho Chi Minh in Indochina. So the United States granted independence to the Philippines in 1946. So another wave of decolonization swept through the Near and Middle East and North Africa. Decolonization in Africa as a slower process, gaining pace in the late 1950s. So this is also one of the example for decolonization. And also the Islamic world in the Middle East, nationalism collided with the economic interests of Western Europe and the United States. So the legacy of colonialism contributed to strife in the Middle East. So in the 1979, the US-backed government of Iran and imposed Islamic rule, but militant Islam sparked deep conflicts with the Arab world itself. So not just between the Sunni and Shia branches of Islam, but also between those states committed to the secular and modernizing vision and those determined to assert fundamentalist Muslim values. So the Iran-Iraq war during 1980 to 1988 was the one manifestation of this rivalry and civil war in Algeria after 1962 after another. So after waging war against Iran, Hussein invaded oil-rich Kuwait in 1989. In 1990, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait provoked a massive United States-led campaign to outside Iraq. So in the meantime, Arab-Israel hostility continued unchecked. Egypt, the largest Arab state, made uh, peace with Israel in 1978. So there was an apparent improvement in Arab-Israel relations in the early 1990s under the Oslo Peace Accords. So this is also one of the phase in this emergence of third world. So if we see, the new hope for the third world is after the completion of decolonization in the Asia and Africa, the newly independent countries emerged as a significant player in international political system. So these nations attended Bandung Conference in Indonesia in 1955, as we said earlier. So these third world nations changed the balance of power with the United Nations as its membership increased every year. So in 1946, there were only 35 member states in the United Nations. By 1970, the membership had increased up to 127. So if you see at present, there are 194 member states are there in United Nations organization. So these initiatives of United Nations organization made the concept of third world or the emergence of third world. So the notion of these three worlds had been dismissed by many critics as inadequate, as the multiple worlds are based on regional military or economic power dynamics or culture or religion and other influences. So the Cold War polarized third world nations, pushing states to choose between alignment with the first and second world, means USA and Russia. So latter distant in the form of summits, many initiatives made by the United Nations organization during the early stages of 1970s. So group of 77 headed the demand for new institutions of global economic management to remove the structural imbalances. So later new international economic order also signaled the diplomatic unity of third world regimes. So this is also one of the important fact about the concept of third world. So after the 10 years after end of World War II, the Bandung Conference forced the great powers to recognize that the weak and had power if they could mobilize it. So the end of the Cold War has dealt the three world order classification scheme a finishing stroke and the disintegration of Soviet bloc. So however, the third world maintains its relevance in the contemporary period. So the developing countries squeezing by its inability to reduce poverty on the one hand and superpower rivalry on the other hand. So struggled to pursue a third way. According to Arif Drelik, geopolitically, the third world is a reference point for development in global politics, referred to as global modernity. So the context of this third world plays an important role as a category, as it is relevant when it is the emphasis is a geopolitical relationships and processes. So the concept of this third world is relevant in the post Cold War era, means after 90s. So the 10 principles articulated at the Bandung conference, especially the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, grounded the cooperation among newly independent states, stressing mutual respect and mutual benefit. So this is the core point of this conference. So the structure of the contemporary international political economy is different from that which prevailed during the Cold War era. So the current international political economy had given rise to a situation in which all these segments are found in both north and the south. So where their differences are lies only in their relative proportion. So emerging in the period of bipolar world dominated by the two superpowers, US and USSR or Russia, the concept of the third world offered different path for the developing countries. At one point of time, it acted as a mobilizing force for the completion of decolonization, and the other hand offered option for counter hegemonic alliance. So the Cold War had enormous impact on developing nations politically, socially, and economically. However, the end of the Cold War, the disintegration of the USSR, and the disappearance of Second World have led to heated debate on the relevance of the Third World and the non-alignment movement. At the Third World, the group of developing countries enjoys continued relevance to the contemporary era as a reference point for development. So the term has now been predominantly effective for the countries that face widespread poverty, uh, sorry for the interruption. I have internet issue here. So, am I audible? Okay, fine. So, these concept of third world uh, presently at present times it is effective to the countries which are under developing nations, which are in the part of uh, underdeveloped countries. So the third world nations uh, no longer look to their former colonizers, but to the World Bank and the to the International Monetary Fund. There is no permanent member to speak in the Security Council on behalf of the South or the third world countries. So they are asking for the expansion of the number of permanent members by including India, Brazil, etc. Whether globalization will solve the third world's problem remains unclear. So at the same time, so this is the concept of the emergence of third world. So now we are going to discuss about the uh, emergence of United Nations organization, which means its structure and its role and its futures, and the role of UNO in peacekeeping operations. So, and also uh, reforms made by the United Nations in the process of peacemaking. So, the United Nations is a global organization tasked with maintaining international peace and security while fostering friendly relations among nations. So, after the end of World War II, they are planned to establish an international organization as a permanent institution for protection of or maintenance of international peace and security. So, the United Nations formed following the devastating World War II with the aim of preventing future global scale conflicts. It was a successor to the ineffective League of Nations. As we discussed in previous class, League of Nations also stands for the purpose of the protection of international peace and security. So, at the time of establishment of United Nations organization, the representatives of 50 governments meet in San Francisco in 25th April of 1945 to draft what world become the UN Charter. So before that, many conferences held for the purpose of the establishment of United Nations organization. So final meeting held in San Francisco on 25th April of 1945. So the 50 countries accepted the UN Charter. The Charter was adopted on 25th June of 1945 and came into effect from the date of 24th October of 1945. So that day we celebrated as UN Day, United Nations Foundation Day. So in accordance with the United Nations Charter, the organization's objectives include maintaining international peace and security and protection of human rights and delivering humanitarian aid and promoting sustainable development and upholding international law. As its founding, the United Nations had 51 member states. This number grew to 193 in 2011, representing the vast majority of the world's sovereign states. So India is one of the founding member of United Nations organization. So the United Nations structure is structured around the five principal organs. One is General Assembly. Second one is United Nations Security Council, UNSC, and third is Economic and Social Council. Fourth is International Court of Justice, and fifth is UN Secretariat. So, as a sixth principal organ, the Trusteeship Council suspended operations on 1994 of November 1st. So, upon the independence of Palau, the last remaining UN trustee territory. So, the UN General Assembly primary function is deliberative assembly of all the UN member states. So the primary task of the this organ is may resolve non-compulsory recommendations to states or suggestions to the Security Council and decides on the admission of new members following a proposal by the UN Security Council and adopts the budget and elects the non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and all members of Economic Social Council and the United Nations Secretary General and the 15 judges of the International Court of Justice. Each country has one vote and UN Secretariat is an administrative organ of the United Nations. It supports the other United Nations bodies administratively. For example, in the organization of the conferences, the writing of reports and studies the preparation of the budget. And its chairperson, the United Secretary General, UN Secretary General, is elected by the General Assembly for a 5-year mandate and the United Nations foremost representative. So the International Court of uh, Justice, it is also one of the important organ, and it is a universal court for international law. So it decides the disputes between states and that recognize its jurisdiction and issues legal opinions and renders judgment by relative majority. Its 15 judges are elected by the UN General Assembly for 9-year terms. So UN Security Council is one of important organ. It is for the purpose of arbitrates international security issues. Arbitrates means mediation. So it is responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. It may adopt compulsory resolutions. It has 15 members, 5 permanent members, and with veto power, and the 10 non-permanent members term 2 years. So if we see the present United Nations Secretary General is Mr. Guterres. So the first Secretary of United Nations is Mr. Lee, and present Secretary General is Guterres, Antonio Guterres. So if we see here, we have to know about what are the 5 permanent members with veto power. The 5 members are: one is China, France, Russia, Britain, Great Britain, and United States of America. So these are the Security Council members. So 5 are permanent members with veto power, and 10 non-permanent members, 5 of which are elected each year by the General Assembly for a 2-year term. So the membership of the Security Council will be for 5 years. So here, just remember these permanent members. Once I repeat, one is China, second is France, third Russia or Russian Federation, fourth United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and United States of America. These 5 are permanent members in United Nations Security Council with veto power. So veto power means they have exclusive power to decide or the power or the right which is vested in with these 5 permanent members. So they can pass a bill or stop it. So in many countries, these veto powers are established their constitutions, but here the power to say no or to stop an official action by these 5 members. So sometimes in these 5 countries, any one of these 5 countries may cast against their vote, means they cast a negative vote against any substantive resolution in the United Nations Council by the permanent members or by the president in the parliament. So an official power here we have to discuss about this veto power is an official power or right to refuse to accept or allow something. So this is veto power. So the power of the president to refuse to approve a bill or joint resolution or thus prevent its enactment into law, that is called as Senate. So the 5 countries has this power. So as we discussed, the 5 permanent members here are having this veto power. So and another organ is UN Economic and Social Council. It is established for the primary function is about for global economic and social affairs. So its primary duty is it is responsible for cooperation between states concerning economic and social matters, and also coordinates cooperation between the numerous specialized agencies of United Nations, and it has 54 members and elected by the General Assembly to serve staggered 3-year mandates. So these are the present 5 important organs of the United Nations organization. So there are several agencies, bodies, institutes, and organizations that underwork for the United Nations system. Some of them predate the UN's establishment and were incorporated into the UN later on, while others were founded afterwards. So they perform important functions across domains, regions, and sectors. So many organizations, many institutions are there. Many specialized agencies also there. There are 17 specialized agencies of the United Nations are there, like Food and Agriculture Organization, International Telecommunication Union, International Fund for Agriculture Development, International Labour Organization, International Maritime Organization, IMF, International Monetary Fund, and UNESCO, World Health Organization, and International Telecommunication Union, and Tourism World Bank Group, Universal Postal Union. Many organizations are there. So they are representing United Nations organizations, functions, and duties. And also the United Nations sets up international conventions which may be legally binding on parties. Parties means here nations. So on various issues and domains, some of the important conventions are there, like Kyoto Protocol, Rio Summit, Montreal Protocol. Many organizations, many achievements happened with this United Nations. India and the United Nations. As we said, India is one of the founding members of United Nations. Even before achieving independence, we are part of this inauguration or establishment of United Nations. So before we got independence, India had signed the declaration by the United Nations at Washington, D.C. in 1944, and also participated in the United Nations Conference, International Organization at San Francisco during 25th April to 26th June 1945. As one of the original members of United Nations, India enthusiastically supports the purpose and principles of the United Nations and has made significant contributions in implementing the goals of organization. And also the United Nations field works and field networks in India are the largest anywhere in the world. Through the many offices, programs, and funds currently at work in the country. So today there are 26 United Nations agencies in India. Some of the milestones that the United Nations had made in India through its agencies are elaborated upon, like Food and Agriculture Organization. When FAO began its India's operations in 1948, so its priority was to transform India's food and farm sectors through technical inputs and support by policy development. So over the years, these Food and Agriculture Organization has made major inroads to in resolving issues such as access to food, nutrition, livelihoods, rural development, and sustainable agriculture. With the sustainable development goals in full swing, the FAO's primary focus will be on improving India's sustainable agricultural practices. And another one is International Fund for Agriculture Development. So it is also have achieved significant results in investigating or investing in the commercialization of smallholding agriculture. And also these IFAD supported projects have been provided women with access to financial services, such as by linking women's self-help groups with commercial banks. And UNAIDS also. India had worked with the United Nations on the joint United Nations program on HIV/AIDS. So the main aim of the program is to help prevent new HIV infections. And Asian Pacific Center for Transfer of Technology. This is UNESCAP, regional institute established in 1977. It works for the fields of technology, transfer, and information and innovation management. And International Monetary Fund also. India has been working closely with the IMF for more on this. Many articles are there. And UNESCO. India has been closely associated with UNESCO. India had been continuously re-elected to the executive board of UNESCO since 1946. So there are also several UNESCO World Heritage sites in India also there. If you see many places, there are almost 46 sites of India on the UNESCO World Heritage tentative list. So many parks like UNESCO Natural World Heritage sites, many parks like Kaziranga, Colorado, Manas Wildlife Sanctuary, and cultural World Heritage sites like Dholavira, Kakatiya, Rudveswara, Ramappa Temple, and Jaipur city. Many places are there: Red Fort, Complex, Jantar Mantar, Hill Forts of Rajasthan, Qutub Minar, and monuments, Elephanta Caves, Khajuraho group of monuments, Agra Fort, Ajanta Caves, Ellora, Taj Mahal. Many places are there, almost all 46 sites. So recently in 2021 July, Dholavira, Harappan city in the Rann of Kutch becomes India's 40th UNESCO World Heritage Site. And in 25th July, UNESCO has inscribed the Rudreshwara temple, Ramappa temple at Palampet, Warangal, Telangana on the list of the World Heritage Sites. So there are at present 46 sites of India on the UNESCO World Heritage tentative list. So and another agency, World Health Organization. World Health Organization has been working closely with the Indian government to improve health outcomes. It has played a stellar part to eradicating several diseases such as cholera, controlling others like malaria, etc. For more on World Health Organization and India, we can search on internet regarding World Health Organization initiatives made in India, particularly. Similarly, other organizations also played a great role in India and helped it in its progress towards development, health, and economic improvement. So, uh, if you see India's contribution towards the United Nations, so as we said, India is one of the active member of the United Nations since its inception. So in 1946, India became the first country to raise the issues of racism and apartheid in South Africa in the UN forum. Apartheid means race, like for example, blacks and whites in America and South Africa also. So India played an important part in the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. So the first woman president of United Nations General Assembly was an Indian, that is Vijayalakshmi Pandit in 1953. And India's contributions to the United Security Council can be contributed immensely in UN peacekeeping missions in various parts of the world. So India has sent peacekeeping troops to Korea, Egypt, Congo, Haiti, Angola, Somalia, Liberia, Lebanon, South Sudan, etc. And also India has been regularly one of the largest contributor of troops to the UN peacekeeping missions. So Mahatma Gandhi's ideals of non-violence resonate deeply with the United Nations principles. In 2007, the United Nations declared Gandhi's birth anniversary of October 2 as the International Day of Non-Violence. So, in 2014, United Nations General Assembly declared that 21st June would be observed as International Yoga Day. So, and also, if we see the United Nations reforms are what are the challenges faced by the United Nations? So, United Nations has had its fair share of challenges in the years of its existence. So now there are no single factor to those challenges, but rather multifaceted factors that make the UN's task of fostering world peace a difficult one. So some of the challenges are there, like geopolitical aggression and intransigence. So conflicts are becoming commonplace and gradually being magnified by rival global powers as they lend support to proxy groups to wage war overseas. So the legacies of military intervention and regime change also one of the challenges. So framed as interventions to counter terror, save civilians, or remove rogue regimes. So in case after case, military intervention and regime change have failed to bring lasting stability or to defeat fundamentalist groups. And some struggling humanitarianism also one of the tough job. Undoubtedly, humanitarians have a tough job. The United Nations and others are making enormous efforts with inadequate resources to assist the victims of conflicts. So, but they are not yet good enough to defending humanitarian values, working for prevention during a crisis, or empowering those affected by humanitarian crisis to take the initiative. So if we see United Nations Security Council reforms also there, there have been great demands for reforms within the Security Council. The G4 nations comprising India, Germany, Brazil, and Japan are championing each other's bid for permanent seats in the Security Council. So, not only the United Security Council, world leaders also demanding a change in the manner in which the United Nations system functions, calling for more localization, lesser bureaucracy, and more decision making powers to those nations where most of the United Nations humanitarian work is concentrated, like the African countries. Like all challenges, to arrive at, it will be a crucial to use the vision and the mandate of sustainable development goals. So, remaining true to an agenda that will transform people's lives requires supporting those who work for peaceful change. So, in and out of government, including women and youth, this requires a willingness to step out of national capitals to talk to a wider range of people, to build up an understanding of conflicts rooted to in people's priorities, and to work in solidarity with peoples to help them. So these reforms are utmost important as the world faces newer challenges in the form of climate change, environmental degradation, population growth, refugee and stateless peoples, etc. So these all are the challenges are facing by United Nations. So after the 75 years, after the establishment of 75 years, the principal aim of maintaining world peace and security, uh, it has been successful in the decolonization process and preventing another world war. However, in the 21st century, so world is very different from the 20th century and poses many new problems and realities. So the present humanitarian and economic losses associated with COVID-19 pandemic are comparable to that of major wars, and unemployment is worse than at any time since the Great Depression 1929. So this has highlighted the challenges pertaining to the multilateral United Nations system. So there has been a general trend of increasing the number of challenges that are transnational in character. For example, terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, pandemics, climate crisis, cyber security, and poverty. So United Nations being the epitome of multilateral world order will be much needed in dealing with global issues. Therefore, the reforms in the United Nations are necessary in order to strengthen United Nations effectiveness as a multilateral organization, bring more transparency to the institution, and enhance its credibility. So challenges against multilateralism in present times, one is rise of new Cold War conflict between US and one hand, and China and Russia in other hand had become new reality in the West East conflict, and some of the differences between United States and other powers is very visible in the Iran nuclear deal, and further rejection of post-war multilateralism and post-Cold War globalism is at the heart of Trump's America's first foreign policy. America first is the quote. So ineffectiveness of UN is has been unable to respond effectively to the once in a century global crisis triggered by the coronavirus. At the United Security Council, uh, China blocked a serious discussion on the origin and sources of the crisis, while the US walked out of the World Health Organization on allegation of supporting China. So many reforms are there. Uh, so if you see the India's role in reforming United Nations system and way forward, uh, balancing national interest and multilateralism. So here, India can leverage multilateralism to serve India's interests, like aligning with Quad countries or working with mechanisms like FATF to mount pressure on Pakistan to stop supporting cross-border terrorism in India. Further, while reclaiming its role in the non-alignment movement, India must engage with other multilateral institutions as new rulemaking, as India is not at disadvantage if rulemaking takes place outside the United Nations. So, history teaches that the fact that crisis catalyze states to rise above inertia, mafia, and narrow self-interest. This can be reflected in the Peace of Westphalia 1648 conferences at Bretton Woods and San Francisco in the 1940s. So the present pandemic is similar to the crisis that can lead to tectonic shift to the world affairs. So India must utilize the next 2 years of its non-permanent member of United Nations Security Council for bringing much needed reforms in the system. So if you see the key United Nations reforms, one is in 1997, Kofi Annan announces his plan for United Nations reform with two reform packages, Track 1 and Track 2. In 2004, two models proposed for expanding the Security Council. In 2005, Kofi Annan presents his most comprehensive reform and policy agenda with his report in Larger Freedom. The Peace Building Commission is established. In 2006, the Human Rights Council replaces the former United Nations Commission. In between 2007 to 16, reforms continues during Ban Ki-moon's term with the launch of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and adoption on the Paris Climate Agreement. During 1917 to 20, reforms envisioned by United Security General Antonio Guterres have been ongoing, which focus on the UN's peace and security pillar. These are the uh, major reforms during these tenure. So this is about United Nations, its structure and functions. So I'm concluding the session. Tomorrow at 10:30, we will meet again to continue our syllabus. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you all.